morning, everyone. It is Easter morning for many of you. April 12th, it's Sunday. Today, I'm hoping that some of you get to spend some time with family, either in person or virtually. Hopefully the weather is lovely wherever you are. Today we are going to be finishing making the what I'm calling a pin pocket that I showed you yesterday. I've got one ready to go, and I've got one that I did start yesterday, just to show you the different stages. First, I want to remember I called the embroidery a fur stitch yesterday. Looked closer, it's actually a feather stitch. And I'm going to link in a set of directions on how to do that stitch in the blog post, okay? Just so if you're not familiar with it, you're able to do that. And it's not horribly hard, okay? So let's see. Do I want to go over anything else before I go forward? I think we're ready to go, actually. Wait, no, antique. Okay, so I'm going to bring out what we're working on again. Okay, everybody can see. All right. And I did add some photos to the blog. Let's just move this over here because Clara does want some attention this morning. There you go. You can say hi. I guess she really wanted a lot of attention overnight because I woke up to an actual scratch on my nose. Looking in the mirror and went, what is that? Yeah. Okay, so yesterday I cut out my pieces, okay? I have my silk, and this is 4.5 inches by 9 inches. Then I have my wool, same 4.5 inches by 9. And I did cut out a piece of batting. Then I realized with the thickness of my fold wool, this is what I use for my needle pages. This one's a little thicker than ideal. It actually was too bulky with all 3 layers, so I'm not going to use this. If you're using a tropical weight wool, go ahead and use the thin piece of batting. And what I had was a very thin, let me show you, very thin cotton batting. That just comes from my quilt shop. All right, I had a thread here that was sticking out. There we go. All right, so I am going to layer these together. Oh, I know what I forgot to bring over was my clips. I think I can do it without my clips. All right, step 1 is to layer everybody together like this, and then we're going to base the layers together. Just a nice big stitch all the way around will do, okay? I really need to remember to thread a bunch of needles before I turn the video camera on. And I should angle this down. After I tie the knot. Okay. A little more. I keep thinking I should turn this to a vertical camera set, but then I hate that sometimes. I hate wasting space because for most of you this is going to show up on a, wow, yep, I'm not awake, on a horizontal or a landscape screen. All right. I don't like doing this without the clips. Okay. Notice I'm not doing my basting stitch like I normally would. I'm holding this upright and sending my needle as directly through as possible. That's because on some of these projects, being off by just a millimeter because of going in at an angle will throw things off. So I'm using more of a direct stab stitch, which is probably a millinery thing for me. Hey, check it out. I'm managing to do this without pausing the video. So yesterday when I cut out my fabric, I basically had a chunk left from some bias cutting. And at one point I was like, ooh, I could use the red stripe or the green stripe. And each of those were like 8 inches of space available. I'm like, okay, won't do that. All right. Now all the way around. Now you're going to notice I'm not really that close to the edge, which is fine because I can remove this basting stitch later. Yesterday's I tried to keep it close to the edge, and well, that was a silly, fussy endeavor. All right, so baste it together. Ta-da! I'm gonna trim a little here at the end. Something I noticed yesterday, because the other piece that I did is is embroidered. I noticed any place along the edge, if there was embroidery, it got really bulky for putting the binding around. So if you're working with something embroidered, go ahead and like unstitch those areas. Okay. Now I am gonna go grab my clips for a second. Okay. These are my little wonder clips. Love them. All right, I picked out a red ribbon. Color's not too bad, but I perfectly admit it's the only silk ribbon I have left that's long enough and wide enough. Yesterday I tried using a narrower ribbon. Let's put these side by side. This was hard. This was a 3/8 inch ribbon. It was very difficult. I ended up with a very narrow binding. Looks okay, but it's much narrower than the original. All right, I'm gonna trim off the pinked end here, and I'm gonna go through and just binder clip this in place. That way I know I have enough ahead of time. All right. Now, yesterday's, like I said, it was really narrow. It was so narrow, I had to put the clips at an angle in order to hold the ribbon in place. I really like these wonder clips. If you haven't had a chance to use these, I definitely recommend them. I especially do love them for fan U projects. I like them for pasteboard, working with pasteboard. What I really, really like is it cuts back on my pin use, the frequency of my pin use. I can use these instead of pins on many things. And that helps with the cat that thinks she can play with everything. Clara does like to steal things. And I just don't trust her as much as I was able to trust Cleo. I could leave out a silk or wool project and Cleo wouldn't touch it. She came running out, so she knows she's to be talked about out here. Clara, on the other hand, will take anything. I have to cover projects up at night, And she'll specifically pretend to be a good little girl all day, and then at night get into mischief. She has left paw prints on the counter. She loves to attack plants. She steals pin cushions. Therein lies the pin needle problem. So I'm constantly counting pins and needles if they're out. I think that's another reason I have so many sewing boxes. Besides the fact that I love them, I put everything in them. Okay, so there we are, all pinned together. All right. You want a fairly fine needle for working with your silk ribbon. Okay. Getting low on my red. Luckily, before everything started, I stocked up on my straw colored thread. I was able to get 5? Yeah, I think it was 5 of the big spools over at Chestnut Bay. But I didn't stock up on any of my colors. All right, let's get going on this. So we're going to basically just whip stitch this little guy into place. I like starting on the outside. And your needle, you're going to go into the silk fabric at an angle, and you're going to come up on the very edge of your ribbon and then promptly catch it on something. That is the one downside of the clips. They're very easy to catch the needle on. And my random needle choice from the pin cushion I'm going to go with was not the wisest. This one might get tossed. The one I was using yesterday was lovely. Let me get a few of these in. I'll show you what I'm doing. For me, if I hear a dull crunch of my needle piercing the silk, that tells me it's time to replace that needle. It's a different crunch when it's sharp. I'm trying to think of how to describe it. It's a whooshy piercing instead of a paper crunching sound, if that makes any sense. Alright, now the trick here is, of course, to get through just the silk and not get into your other layer, okay? Alright, so that's what the front looks like, and it looks like going a little further through than I would like. I have to be careful of that. On the back side. I'm realizing that I have this so you can't quite see. How's that? Now I like to hold my index finger underneath where I'm stitching. This simultaneously gives me a little platform pushing the fabric up at a bit of a curve. So I'm catching just the silk and a little tiny bit of that wool. But it also gives me a bit of a measure. So I know the feel of how far on my finger below, I want that needle to go before I come back up. You may have seen some of the illustrations or photos where people are marking little lines on their fingers for measuring, gauging for skirts, or for keeping the width of like a blanket stitch. I think those are really useful tips. My way of practicing gauging is actually to use striped or checked fabric, something that has a regular interval, so you can practice that rhythm by catching the same number of striped lines at a time. You have a small enough checker stripe, you can get a really tiny gauge going. All right. So I'm gonna get down to the end, I think, on this side, and I'll show you the other side. And then I'm going to switch over to the other piece, okay? Rather than have you watch me go all the way around. I think that'd make for a very long video. Now, when I was working on the other one yesterday, start thinking about the different ways you could use these. Obviously, this is meant for carrying your pins and needles. But if you wanted to have a very quick, portable mini display, this is plausible. The wool silk combination makes a nice platform for buttons, I would think. You could easily sew a sampling of buttons. So if at an event you had the opportunity to talk about buttons, you could just pull out your little sample and have a dozen or so different types of buttons ready to display and talk about. And I'm sure other items could get sewn down as well. All right, so I'm switching over to the wool side here. And the wool really does provide that nice blank slate for displaying things. You could do an assortment of stitches, plain sewing or fancy stitches. I think what else you could do. All right, let me show you what I'm doing there. All right. Oh, my corners are mitered, okay? And then the last one is kind of like a fake miter. I'll show you that on the other one. If you have other ideas for what you could put in here to display, comment them in the blog. I think it's time to switch pieces here. Okay, let me set this one over here. We'll get back to that later, and we'll pull out this one. Okay, so this one, like I said, it's one of those embroidered pieces. This is a much more modern silk, okay? And now that I'm looking at it that direction, I did not get this as centered as I wanted. Well, poo. I didn't even notice that yesterday. So I tried to center this design. I really did line the ruler up on this. Anyway, so this is done with the 3/8 wide silk, okay? So you can see how narrow that is on each side, okay? And then you can see the mitered, really mitered corner. Maybe I'll show you a little bit better that way. Okay, so there's the mitered corner, gone all the way around. And now it's time to do either your ribbon or your embroidery stitch, okay? So let's take a look at the original here. I'm gonna turn her over. All right. Oh, good thing I'm double checking. This is very specific. So the ribbon does need to go on first, okay? I'm gonna lift this way gently. Bring that over to show you what that looks like. I'll take a photo of that so you can see that. So we're gonna put the ribbon on first, and then we embroider over it. Okay, so I only had a little bit of the same pink left, so I can choose between two different color, slightly lighter pink, or I have a slightly narrower, brighter pink. All right, I think I'm gonna go with the slightly lighter pink, because that sticks with how the piece was originally made. Okay, that was 20 inches we figured out yesterday, and I have just over 20 inches here. Okay, I was kind of hoping for a little bit more because I have another project that I'm saving the narrow ribbons for. Why did I just cut that at that angle? All right, so I want to cut this at a 45-degree angle across. Save that piece. Okay, and to line this up, we need to remember that when it's closed, all right, and I want to be able to have it closed so I see most of the embroidery on the outside. So I'm going to have this be the spot that I'm sewing onto. When it's closed, you want to have the ribbons be even, okay? So this is how I'm finding the spot I want to mark here. I'll just hold that with a clip for now. Okay. Switch over to some pink thread. I don't need a whole lot. I really should have put some finer needles in this pin cushion, but again, we're counting the needles and where they are. We're just going to secure this in place through the silk. All right. Okay. Now here's the hard part. I really want it lined up on that motif. But I really need it to be in the center. All right, so we got it centered. So I'm going to start my needle under the ribbon. I don't know if you can see that. And we're just going to do a few stitches back and forth to get this secured in place. So I have the ribbon secured right at the very base. And now I'm actually going to secure it up at the top as well. Just lightly. Because on the original, the ribbon is attached all the way through the binding. And this will keep this down, especially if one embroiders over it. I'll show you what this looks like in a second. Behind the end. And cut that off. Okay, so yeah, there's some early morning stitching. Okay. Now, what I really wanted to do in terms of embroidery, I wanted a really pretty pink, okay? Because, you know, we're doing a lot of pink. Alas, I somehow don't have pink. So we're going with a green. I also don't have silk in the colors that I want. So again, we're going with green. I think we're going with green on the other one too. I don't have a lot of embroidery floss here. So I've got a green. And I'm just undoing this until I can figure out where I had cut this previously. And I want 2 threads for this, I think. Embroidery, not my forte, okay? Not my strength. So I'm sure there's a lot of terms and concepts that others are more familiar with than I am. I put the needle in and I make pretty things. That's what I do. Sorry. Oh, well, that needle's getting tossed. We're not going to use that. I really don't want to use this one either because that's huge. I don't like working with big needles. All right. There we go. And the other variation I'm actually going to do on this. Okay, so the original has the embroidery right on the ribbon. Because I have such a narrow ribbon, I'm actually going to go inside the ribbon on the wool, okay? I really should have started this before I started the video, because let's just say it's been a while since I've done any sort of fancy stitch. Usually the only places I do them are on sewing cases and occasional pin cushions. I'll just left it a little brighter than I like. All right. Grandma always taught me bury my thread, so I don't usually do a lot of knots. All right, we'll do a couple stitches here. We'll see how even I can actually get this. You can get an idea of where I'm going with this. I still have not figured out what the dots are on the original embroidery. She's got extra dots adjacent to each I'll call it a feather loop. Part of me was wondering if it was for turning the corners. And I noticed it's not just where the corners are. All right. So I'm going to have to be very careful to keep this consistent. But it gives you an idea of where I'm going with this. I'm going to go all the way down and around the entire perimeter. For this one. For the red one, we'll see which way I go. And both are okay because I have seen originals where the embroidery is just on the wool. I've seen embroidery dividing things into sections. I thought about using some of the extra ribbon for that. That would make a very pretty design. I'm worried. When I look at the clock like this, funny, it means how long have I been on? Oh goodness, we've broken the half-hour point. I'm sorry about that. All right, so I'm doing my embroidery. I'm gonna do the other one. You work on yours and enjoy your Easter if you're celebrating Easter. Otherwise, have a wonderful Sunday, okay? And I'll talk to you tomorrow with a shorter video, okay?